Hey, so this is Oliver from Blue Liquid Labs. Today I'm going to be showing you how to solve creaks that commonly plague single crown forks. So with Fox forks, it's really commonly the press fits of the stanchions that end up creaking. You can kind of isolate those. I've seen DVOs and RockShox where it's also coming from like a looser type press fit than it should be at the steer tube. But I'm going to show you what I mean. You can kind of isolate it at the stanchions on Fox forks usually. Makes a noise like that, especially obvious under heavy braking. And so I'm going to be basically showing you how I solve that. I think I might have been one of the first people to describe what was going on inside on my website back in 2014, but I never had a phone good enough to really film the whole thing of how to solve it, so I'm going to show it to you today. This is just a basic, I think 12-ton hydraulic press from China. It might have been around 150 bucks. You can pick them up at a place called Harbor Freight, where a lot of things get imported from China. And in Canada, they have a place called Princess Auto, similar kind of thing. Anyway, so I'll show you how to set it up. They usually come with plates like this. You know, they're useful just for supports. But in this case, for stanchion removal, I made my own kind of press out plate. And it just kind of has a little stepped, stepped like circle. And there's a ring that just kind of gets placed right in that stepped circle there. So there's different sized rings for different stanchions. In this case, it's a Fox 36 I'm working on. So put the 36 millimeter ring on the stanchion. Place the stanchion in the press out plate. And we are going to have to, we're probably going to have to adjust this press. Anyway, so I make a different kind of adapter for each press depending on what you have. This is one of the smaller types. It's got an O-ring to just kind of hold itself on there with friction. So in order to press this out, you're going to need like a threaded die just like that. Each fork, unfortunately, has to have a different threaded die. Even Fox themselves, it seems like every couple of years they change out the size of the threaded dies. Or not the threaded dies, but the threads in the stanchions, and then I end up having to make new dies for them. Alright, we're going to adjust that. Okay. Make sure everything's lined up well. Make sure that threaded die is screwed in all the way. All right, here we go. So you can hear that kind of stick slip sound, and that to me, from my measurements I've taken over the years, is usually characteristic of like an interference fit of around 0.1 millimeters, which I would say is a pretty ideal interference. But nonetheless, there's still, from usage and from heavy braking, you're still going to get something called fretting corrosion, which begins to develop on the inside of that press fit interface. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. It looks like just like a black corrosion on both the surface of the stanchion as well as the inside surface of the crown. And so in order to solve the creaking, we're just going to have to clean that oxide out of there, and we're going to have to press the stanchions and steer tube back in with Loctite 609. once we press them in with Loctite 609, the creaking, pretty much 99.9% of the time it goes away, unless there's another issue, such as maybe like a poor press fit. But as long as you're running 0.1 millimeter interference, it's you get really good results using this method. In here. There we go. All right. So definitely I notice different climates seem to make these things better or worse depending on where you live. This stanchion actually looks pretty good. This is going to clean up real nice. Let's have a look at the inside of that crown. So I'm going to see if you can see that black colored oxide I was talking about in there. So that's really what makes the creaking, is because when you have fretting corrosion that occurs when you have like very close fitting surfaces, you know, especially when it really occurs when when you load them. So when you have your fork in your frame and you hit your front brake hard, that really loads, you know, it bends the hell out of the CSU. And so it causes this relative microscopic motion, you know, and it rubs the surface into this kind of fretted condition. But it's real, you know, we're talking real microscopic movements on the order of probably maybe like micrometers. And so, yeah, we really gotta, all we gotta do is gotta clean that surface out. There's different ways of doing it. I tend to do it with like just a really fine, worn out piece of sandpaper. Because what we want to do is we want to clean this out, but we don't want to remove any of the aluminum so as not to ruin that nice, you know, ballpark 0.1 millimeter interface, or 0.1 millimeter interference rather. So you might be wondering, you know, why don't we do this from the factory, like just apply Loctite from the factory? Well, I've worked on a lot of forks and they've actually tried from the factory. I've noticed certain forks that looked like they had some green colored, most likely 609 Loctite, but the problem is that when the surfaces are smooth and there's no grooving or dimpling on the inside, it really, when you press the stanchion into the crown, it really wipes most of the Loctite away. And so it doesn't really retain it well. And so what I noticed over the years, the cool thing is that, you know, when you have that corrosion, that kind of, those pits, the corrosion creates these pits in there, and the pits, they actually act as the perfect retainer of Loctite. And so because of that, you actually tend to get the best, longest lasting results with the forks that are like the most beat up and the most corroded, which is kind of funny. Yeah, so the reason that the oxide makes so much noise is because you got to remind yourself what we're dealing with here. Aluminum oxide, you might be familiar with that compound without actually knowing it. A lot of actually almost all bench grinder wheels that I'm aware of, like, you know, common ones that you could find in any shop, those bench grinder wheels are actually made of aluminum oxide. So if you can imagine, you know, pressing this together with some like you know, bench grinder wheel dust, you can only imagine that the crunching of that aluminum oxide dust from the bench grinder, that would make a hell of a racket. And it does so because an aluminum oxide, just like a lot of oxides, they're no longer technically considered a metal. It becomes like a ceramic type material, which ceramic, it's a lot harder than metal. So, you know, it just, even though it becomes, probably gets pulverized into a fine dust, still it makes a real racket, you know, because this stuff is so hard, and it keeps wearing away at the inside aluminum surface, particularly the raw, you know, the raw aluminum on the inside of the crowns. So I'm just going to finish cleaning up that stanchion, and then we'll show you how to press that back together. Right, so the setup for pressing in is going to be a little different. We'll take that press out plate out, and what we use for pressing in are just these two caps. So one cap goes in the bottom of the stanchion, and this is really important that it's like a really precisely fitting cap, because there is a circlip groove at the bottom of almost every stanchion, and the material there gets really thin at that circlip groove. So you just want to make sure that this thing is getting supported well, and rather than you know, the stanchion just being supported at the bottom where it has a chance to crush the circlip groove, there's a shoulder right around this level, usually for the like the seal head, and you want to push against that shoulder because that's a lot stronger than the thin part at the bottom with the circlip groove. So in the grand scheme of all fretting corrosion in forks I've seen, this one's really not that bad, and it's not really much of a surprise given the climate it came from. This one came from Texas. The worst ones I've ever seen they're almost always from the Pacific Northwest, where it's just a really wet environment, and I guess maybe it makes for some accelerated corrosion inside of there. All right. So we're going to take our Loctite 609 compound, and we're just going to get that stuff in there. So what I do is I put it all the way around inside that crown bore, and I'm also going to put some of it on the stanchion as well. I just want to make sure I get all the surfaces coated. Now a bunch of it's going to inevitably rub away, but we just want some of it to end up in there. So I'm putting it upside down just because that works a little better in this case, but you know, it varies case by case. All right, so here we go. You can hear that change in sound when it's reached the end. All right. All right, so there we have one. Just going to wipe away the excess Loctite. And now I'm going to repeat the whole same procedure for the other side. Okay, so it looks like this one has more fretting corrosion in there than the last one. Let's see if you can see that. You see all that corrosion? So it's really important that we clean that out. If we don't, and we just press it back in there with Loctite, then nothing's gonna happen. It's just gonna keep on. It'll probably just keep on crunching. So for doing the steer tube, it's a different setup. I'm just going to show you what we have. So we're going to use one of the blocks they included with the press. So for the steer tube, I got this universal kind of support. And there is a cap that just goes right on the very top there. Great. All right. So this procedure obviously works if you're whether you are decreaking with Loctite or whether you're, replacing for a longer steer tube. Yeah, so with the interface there, you can see a little bit of that black oxide I was talking about. So we're just gonna clean that up. All right, so I got my press-in tube. That's just going to be placed right there. Just going to put some Loctite on this steer tube. Support down. wipe that Loctite away. There it is. Silent. So, you know, in this case, it really paid to do the third step, which is the steer tube, because you never really know which is the thing that's creaking. See, most of the time on Foxes, in my experience anyway, it's the stanchions, but in this case, the biggest thing looked like it was the steer tube. So Loctite in there, should be good for a while.